I'm Diane Stevens, Chief Executive of TOFS. And in this part of the morning, we're going to hear Greg Ryan's story, and I'm really looking forward to that. Thanks, Kate, for stepping into the breach this morning and for sharing this and for some of your story as well.
This has all been a little bit of a last minute approach, because I received a telephone call from Greg at 7 o'clock this morning, who, as Duncan said earlier, is absolutely struck down with COVID. He could barely speak to me, bless him. So what I'm intending to do, as I was also born with ARM, is look at the individual slides and just, I've no intentions of reading out all the detail, but I've made some notes, and if you can bear with me, we can talk about Greg and the 1 in 5,000 Foundation. I believe that only 10% of those born with TOFS also have an anorectal malformation, but I'm not 100% sure of that figure. But that was a figure given to me recently by someone from the European Reference Network. First of all, thank you, Greg, for allowing me to present your life story. This is an honour anyway. So slide 1 is a picture of Greg, who I've known virtually for the past couple of years. I found him on the internet after experiencing a few worrying health issues relating to my early life surgery. Greg and I were both born with an anorectal malformation, although 10 years apart and on different continents. It has taken me 6 years to find another adult with the same birth defect as me, and we hope to meet in person this summer. Slide 2. You can see Greg's description of his birth defects. My anorectal malformation was, of course, different as a female, affecting my uterus and my fallopian tubes. In addition to the ARM, I had esophageal atresia, Tracheo-Oesophageal Fistula, strangulated bowel, all of which required emergency surgery at Ladywood Birmingham Children's Hospital. And I know that I'm very lucky, very fortunate with the surgeons that I had then, who are both no longer with us, but I'm lucky to have survived that. So slide 3 and 4. You can see here that there's lots of detail about the many surgical interventions which were needed to keep Greg alive. A colostomy is essential in the first few hours of life, as the anus may not function properly. The term ARM covers many other pelvic floor abnormalities, including a tethered cord, neuropathic bladders, bladder exstrophy, hyperspadias, vaginal fistula, a cloaca, to name but a few. So when we talk about anorectal malformation, it really is a pelvic floor anomaly, which, as I said, can affect the bladder, the bowel, the fertility issues, to name but a few. It's important also here to mention, because he's put in his slides about surgical procedures, to mention that approaches nowadays, and when we're talking, for me, I'm 65 this year, in fact, and Greg in his 50s, that approaches to surgery are very different, and aftercare is very different, and is improving all of the time. Collaboration by highly specialized surgeons sharing knowledge across the globe is vital for this to continue, as it is for those born with OA and TOF. Eurogen, which is a European reference network, works incredibly hard to provide expert advice, clinical intervention and ongoing support for those born with urogenital abnormalities. And Professor Spander had really just touched on the role of ERNs in relation to TOF. So there is tremendous work happening across the world. Greg faced a lifetime of healthcare, invasive interventions, often accompanied by anxiety, not dissimilar to those born with OA TOF. Okay, slide 5. Now this, which he's put, not normal. This slide's very interesting for me, as I really did not know what normal was until I started nursing in 1976 at the age of 18. That may seem difficult for you to believe nowadays, as our lives are more about sharing and to not be ashamed of our disabilities. But in the 1950s, it was a very different story. His slide here, discussion points. He's obviously talked about his secret, keeping the embarrassment and the shame to himself. And he's listed things like fecal incontinence and the leakage. and how that impacts on relationships, sexual health, intimacy, keeping clean, and living with that level of anxiety and stress, and how that can result in post-traumatic stress disorders for some people born with these complex anorectal anomalies, as it can affect some people born with OA TOFS as well, when they've had such hospitalizations, invasive procedures, fear, not knowing who to trust. So this, although a little bit of this slide can be a bit amusing, seeing the child sat on the toilet trying to have a poo. For those of you who have experienced constipation, it can be very debilitating and an embarrassing problem, because you often have the associated flatulence. For many children born with ARM, continence issues are our daily battle, either diarrhea with soiling, or days of constipation, which involve trips to hospitals for enemas, and sometimes manual evacuation under anaesthetic. And that basically means that if you are so severely constipated that that cannot be removed through medication or enemas, then you're given an anaesthetic where that's feces are removed whilst you're asleep. At this point, I just want to add a little bit about myself, really. And when I look back on my childhood, I class it as a childhood loss. I've always been anxious and frightened and in flight or fight mode, always alert and expecting the worst, alone and sometimes terrified of what was happening and what was likely to happen, and adults asking me questions for which I had no answer. Why did I poo in my pants? Projecting their anxieties about my future onto me, a lost child who struggled to understand the grown-up language and many times the medical jargon which accompanied it. From my experience, personal experience, the lack of knowledge, and again, we're going back decades, so the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding of the surgery, you were not fixed at surgery, that nerves and muscles are affected, and that has an implication for the rest of your life, and that you cannot control what's going on in your lower bowel, and you are not being naughty. The message here, I believe, is that despite all the current surgical techniques, many children face daily bowel programs to keep themselves socially clean and to prevent cross-contamination, resulting in bladder infections. So although science and medical expertise has advanced tremendously, there's still an everyday challenge that the children born with this anomaly face. Slide 7, I'm not alone. This takes us to Greg's personal triumph over finally realizing that he's not alone with his ARM. He found the courage to share his story. And basically, as you can see, he's typed Imperforate Anus onto Facebook, and that changed his life. For me, it took a few years later. I typed in Imperforate Anus into Facebook and to Google, and I found Greg. But he found the courage to share his story, and that's not an easy thing to do when it involves details of bowel function, anatomical differences, intimacy, hygiene, and anxiety. Slide 8 and 9. By opening that door, as you can see, he's developed the 1 in 5,000 Foundation, because ARM affects 1 in 5,000 of the population. He's taken off the overcoat of embarrassment and shame, and he's able to connect with people across the world, giving lectures, talks in the United States of America and Paris, and going on to write his book, A Secret Life. The Secret Life book is obviously about all the things that I've read The Secret Life. I have a copy, and some of the slides in this presentation are taken from the book. There's a lot of information about his hospitalization. But I think the important thing here is that this is like the first time that somebody's stepped out, that they have written something very personal, which affected them as a child and has gone through their whole life with. He's got testimonials, from leading colorectal surgeons, Dr. Mark Levitt and Alberto Pina, who are American surgeons, who are both still working now and can be found on the internet if you're interested in reading or watching some of their work. and all proceeds, as it says, goes directly to 1 in 5,000 Foundation. Slide 10 and 11. This was published in 2021, The Rare and Resilient, with the 1 in 5,000 Foundation logo. At that point, I had been in contact with Greg. As I said before, we've not met yet. And he approached me about writing a piece, writing a chapter for the book. Initially, I really dismissed the idea, and I didn't feel able to share the very personal information with other people around the world. And then one day I just sat in front of my laptop, and away I went and typed. So I have a chapter in this anthology. It's stories of parents, children and adults affected by our ARM. And that's led to podcasts, which again, you can find easily on the internet if you're interested. And I feel it was a privilege. And for me, I think a step forward into embracing what I was born with, and not being afraid of sharing, not being afraid of being judged. And for the first time, other than my husband, the first time I was able to share with my siblings and my closest friends. So it is really like taking off an overcoat after all these years. And I'm probably talking incredibly fast, and I'm using up the minutes much more swifter than Greg would have done. But looking at page 12 and 13, sorry, Greg's work and the 1 in 5,000 Foundation has helped to support disadvantaged people around the world, and particularly this this Help for Ghana project. And I think that these images highlight just how fortunate we are in the UK. When I had a colostomy, there were no infant bags to collect the stool. They hadn't been designed. That's quite a sobering thought, I think. My parents were given loads of cotton wool and bandages and buckets of barrier cream, and my mother used to be very proud that I never, ever had any sore skin. But we were very fortunate in that I had an excellent GP who would just provide her with whatever she needed to keep my skin healthy. I cannot imagine what it must be like for children to have no appliances for their stomas in the 21st century. So this project helps focus our thoughts on what to do with any supplies, consumables that were no longer needed, that have gone out of date and cannot be returned to the UK NHS. So if anyone's out there with anything they feel could be handed over to this project, that would be fantastic. And finally, really, the ways to connect with Greg, if anyone is out there with an anorectal malformation, or they know of anyone who has urogenic problems, there's lots of information there on the slide. And the key messages, I think, are similar, really. As with OA-TOF, lifelong care from expert health professionals who understand our condition, who listen and value our opinions, who appreciate the anxieties we may present them with. What may be straightforward procedures for others not born with a rare disease can be huge emotional triggers and hurdles for us to overcome. So thank you. Sorry, I'm probably whizzed that very quickly. I think I've covered everything, and Greg has obviously put thank you very much to Claire and Diane for the invitation to present today. And his final slide, which I'm not going to read out because I think I'll probably get too emotional, but is there on the screen. His book, yeah. I mean, there's some really significant things for me there, because he's shared for years. It's not shared for years, and then the shock that other people have when they realise that you've coped with all of that, really.
Thank you for that. Yeah, very moving. Certainly reading that last bit. And thank you, obviously, for standing in at the last minute to take over from Greg's presentation, and obviously filling it full of your own personal life experiences as well.